Okay, we're going to skip ahead this week to chapter 8, and next week we'll come back to chapter 7 because there's a lot of information to learn there. So this week we're going to talk some about fine arts media, and we're going to start with the most fundamental of these, and this is drawing. So let me explain what I mean by that word media or medium. So medium is the singular form and media is the plural form. And one of the definitions of that as it relates to art is this is any material used to make art, such as oil paint on canvas or clay or bronze or graphite on paper, lithography, silkscreen, video, film, etc., etc., etc. So there's another definition for medium and media in the plural form. And in painting, a medium is a liquid that's added to the paint to make it easier to manipulate. So with watercolor and gouache, the primary medium that would be mixed with that would be water. There's other mediums like to make it iridescent or otherwise, but usually when you paint with watercolor or gouache, you're mixing it with water. In oil paint, the medium might be turpentine, and it could be linseed oil, it could be turpentine, linseed oil, and beeswax. It's like there's all sorts of things. But usually with oil paint, you're mixing it with another oil to thin it down and to make it easier to glaze. So as I might have mentioned at the beginning of this, no, I did not, but now I will, that drawing is the oldest medium. We're going to talk about others later, painting, sculpture, printmaking, photography, etc. But drawing's the oldest. And like even before recorded history, obviously, people have been drawing as soon as they could pick up something to draw with, and that could be a piece of burnt charcoal or clay or some other mineral. They've been drawing. And the cool thing about drawings, like these really old drawings, like the two that we're looking at right now, the one on the left is 30,000 years old. I love the one on the left. Isn't that a really cute little woolly mammoth? And then the one on the right is about 9,000 years old. And the great thing about these is that no matter where you're from, what time period, what culture, what country, whatever, you look at these drawings and you recognize what you're seeing. So drawing is a universal language that we all pretty much understand. So the earliest known drawing was created by somebody in South Africa 73,000 years ago. Now you may not think this is much of a drawing, but I'm sure these diamond shapes totally represented something to the people in this culture. So they're making marks, and making marks is making a drawing. Everybody doodles, even if you think you can't draw and I'm talking and you're bored, you're gonna start making marks, drawing, doodling on a piece of paper. So everybody draws, whether you want to admit it or not. Haha. So all kinds of visual artists produce drawings, including all kinds of visual artists, including architects, produce drawings. But there's a number of kind of drawings that they create. So there's preparatory drawings, preparatory sketches. That's a drawing that is in that when they're working out an idea for a like more finished piece of work, they'll do sketches. There's the final product. That would be the more completed piece of work. They draw. Engineers, I should have included engineers in here. They draw to invent. or to improve upon the inventions of others. They draw to better understand nature. They draw to understand and record movement. So this is St. Peter's in Rome, and it took 6 architects. I started to say 50 billion. 6 architects in over 100 years to figure out how to make this dome on top of St. Peter's structurally sound. One of those architects was Michelangelo, I think, but I don't want to, I'd lie if I said that. I was going to say he was the last one, but that's not true at all because he died before this was completed. Like artists, before they're going to make a sculpture, they make preparatory sketches. And this is the preparatory sketch of all time. I'm going to tell you a story about this. So this is a drawing. These are drawings by Leonardo da Vinci in preparation for making a sculpture. The end product was supposed to have a man riding this prancing horse. But it took over 500 years before this horse became an actual sculpture. So I'm going to tell you the story. So back then, when you are an artist, you needed somebody to sponsor you, and usually those were like nobility, somebody that was ruling a city state or a country or whatever, how do you like that? And one of Leonardo da Vinci's sponsors was the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. And he, like, among many things Leonardo did for him, he designed sculptures, he designed mausoleums, he like worked on military like machines of war, he worked on like buildings, he worked on all sorts of stuff. So so he's not just doing sculptures for the Duke. And so the Duke wants to honor his father Francisco, who had passed away. He wanted to have an equestrian statue with Francisco riding on top of the statue. So he asked Leonardo to make this for him. Now, granted, Leonardo is busy with all these other things he's doing for the Duke, but also Leonardo is a perfectionist and a procrastinator. So it takes him 11 years before he even presents the Duke with a 24-foot model of the statue. It's made out of clay in honor of Ludovico daughter's Bianca's wedding, who, by the way, I think it's like she's probably like 13. 13 years old, getting married. So then he designs this, but then they go to war with France, and the sculpture was going to be made out of bronze, and the bronze that they're going to use for this statue is melted down and used to make cannons in the war between Milan and France. And Leonardo, here he is, he flees the city, and in the meantime, the soldiers use the 24-foot statue as for target practice. So they're shooting arrows and stuff into it. They just totally mess it up. So then, like, time goes by, and then nearly 500 years later, this guy named Charles Dent, I think he was an engineer, he decides he's gonna attempt to make Leonardo da Vinci's horse. And this is where the term Charlie horse comes from, because he's working on this model, and everybody calls it Charlie horse. So then he dies, and so it doesn't get finished. And the Stalax Art Foundry, they decide they're going to make it. So the people that work for them start working on it, but they're doing a really bad job. So they hire this famous animal sculptor to complete it. Her name's Nina Akamu. And in 1999, nearly 500 years after Leonardo did his first sketches and then procrastinated about it, Il Cavaro is installed and dedicated in Milan, where it was originally intended for. So back then, I just want to talk about this a little bit. Back in the day, and this is like thousands of years ago, young artists, they didn't just go out and go to art school and then I'm an artist. It didn't work like that. They had to apprentice with master artists. Master artists were people that had made masterpieces and proven that they were these great artists. So the young artists apprenticed with them. This apprenticeship system started in ancient Egypt and Babylon, and young apprentices often had to pay the master artist. So it's kind of like going to school. You might get your room and board, but you might also have to pay for it. So their parents would have to pay for them to work with this artist. And then, so you were like an apprentice for 2 to 9 years. It depended on what you were learning and how quickly you learned. And then once you, I'm putting graduated in quotes, graduated from this, you then went to the next stage, which is a journeyman. And journeyman, the term comes from journée, a French word, which it means you were paid daily. And you had to produce a masterpiece in order to become a master artist. So sometimes these journeymen would remain in the same, like working under the same master artist. And sometimes they would go from master artist to master artist so that they could learn additional techniques. And then once you made that masterpiece, you became a master artist. So a lot of times when artists did murals or paintings, stuff like that, the apprentice and the journeyman, like let's say you're doing a painting, a big mural with a lot of figures, the journeyman and the apprentice, they might paint the body and the clothing of the figure, but the master artist a lot of times would do the faces and the hands, those really distinctive features. So back then, the paper was unbelievably expensive. So the first paper was made in China. This is around 105 AD. They're using hemp pulp, and they're beating it up, and then they're putting it in water, and then they put these screen frames in water and move the pulp around and then lift it up and then let the pulp dry on that screen frame. They put it in a press, like they'll do a whole big stack of them, and they put pieces of felt between the stack, and then they, with that press, they squeeze out all the water. So it was expensive. It took many people to make a single sheet of paper. So so back then, you're not going to let like a 12-year-old have a piece of paper to learn how to draw on. So they would give them like a board that maybe had been covered in some kind of ground, like where they would prepare the surface to seal the wood, like limestone, sometimes shell that had been like powdered up and then mixed with water and then painted on there. Or they might give them a piece of slate to draw on. And a lot of times apprentices would copy the drawings of the master artist, of the paintings of the master artist, because that master artist knew everything they knew about anatomy and about perspective and all that stuff. And by copying, these young artists learned by doing how to do these different methods. So back in the day, again, now we're talking about medieval time period, actually all the way back to Rome, even before medieval time period, there were two forms of the arts and schooling, actually. There were the liberal arts and the mechanical arts. So the liberal arts, and I'm not going to remember all of these, I'm sorry. The liberal arts, those had to do with rhetoric and oratory and like mathematics and astronomy and music and stuff like that. So liberal, that comes from the word free. So if you were well-to-do and a free person, and usually a free man, although women did study these some, you could study all these different forms that fell under the liberal arts. If you were either a slave or a working class person, you did not have the leisure, and they also thought you did not have the intellect to study the liberal arts. So you study the mechanical arts, and that could be have to do with masonry or carpentry or like making jewelry or anything you did with your hands. And back then, they thought that that people that did these mechanical arts, they thought they're not using their brain, they're just using their eyes and hands. And we'll learn more about this when that was like decided not exactly true when we talk about painting. But also I want to throw in here that drawing and painting fell within the realm of the mechanical arts up until the Renaissance time. Oh, here's the list of the liberal arts. There's grammar, language, rhetoric, mathematics, geometry, music, astronomy. And then here's mechanical arts: shoemaking, martial arts, including hunting, commerce, trade, tailoring, weaving. You can read, can't you? Read this list. Okay. So I already said this. And during, I guess I got mixed up when I started talking about this. So during the Renaissance, it became necessary for artists to have an understanding of some of those liberal arts, which were mathematics. They needed to understand anatomy. They needed to understand optics. So then all of a sudden, because they need to know all of these things, they start considering visual arts as a liberal rather than a manual art. They start considering the people that are making these as geniuses. So the concept of the genius was actually older than the Renaissance. It comes from like ancient times when, I believe this is Roman, ancient times when people believed that poets and philosophers and like other creative people were given this breath of inspiration by this little demigod called a genius. Like the genius would blow in your ear. And some of these people that were given this gift were also, they considered them a little nutty, but that was all part and parcel of being a genius. So during the Renaissance, the people like Raphael, Donatello, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, they're all of a sudden they're considered geniuses, and people are actually paying like for their drawings, their sketches that they did in preparation for more finished works. So let's get to those preparatory sketches that I was talking about. So back then what they would do is they would make a large drawing on a heavy-duty paper, probably vellum, that was going to be what they used as their template for a larger like for the mural or for the painting that they were gonna do. The drawing was as large as the mural or the painting. You know, they're like for a big mural, they'd have several drawings that they tacked together. And these preparatory drawings were called cartoons or cartoons. So it's not like a cartoon like Daffy Duck or anything. It's like this is what they call, this is like Italian or Latin, for this big preparatory sketch. And what they would do is they do these sketches, and then they would take a little something to poke holes in the paper, like all along the lines, like think of dot to dot. And then once they tack this up on the wall, they would take powdered minerals and maybe like sienna, raw sienna, and then they would put it in a little pouch, and they would ponce that pouch over the holes so that a little bit of that sienna would go into each hole, and then they would pull the paper off, and you would still see the raw sienna dots on it, and then that would be their what they would use when they were completing the painting. So they'd have like a faint sketch on the wall. So artists also draw to invent, and I'm like a while ago I included engineers in this. People that are inventing things draw preparatory drawings. So like one of Leonardo da Vinci's jobs was to make these machines of war, and a lot of times he'd work on these drawings, but they were so advanced that they didn't have the technology to make them. Now, I recently watched a show on Leonardo da Vinci on PBS, and they said a lot of these inventions, what we thought of as inventions of his, were actually improvements upon other other drawings, inventions that other artists had done. So a lot of times some of his were original, and then a lot of times he would look at those drawings and then he would improve it. And this is like a parachute that he actually, you know, like made a man jump off a building and using it to hopefully glide to the ground, but he kind of crashed to the ground and had to have a bunch of bones set. This is a invention of a helicopter. Well, they weren't able to make it because it was beyond their technology. Here's a glider. He tried this too. I think he put someone else in it as well. And then guess what? They crashed. Here's an invention of a tank, or like here's a crossbow. So he's doing all these drawings to either improve upon somebody else's invention or to invent on his own. I included these drawings. I love these drawings. These are kind of made up flying machines. This is a guy who was like in a mental institution for 40 years, and Carl von Yankee. And he did like hundreds of these drawings of these beautiful, amazing flying machines. Like this is like based on a dirigible, which is a real flying machine. But some of them are more fantastic. And what I really like about these is how beautiful his handwriting is and how it actually complements these drawings. So artists also, and like scientists, like biologists, botanists, etc., they draw to better understand nature. So I'm focusing on Leonardo da Vinci here. So he was just super curious about everything, and a lot of times he would do these sketches from nature and then incorporate them into his paintings. So he was going to do, I think, like a painting of St. George and the Dragon, and started thinking like, well, maybe like a dragon, maybe its movements are really similar to a cat. So here's a sheep though. He started like watching these cats and drawing them in all sorts of different positions and postures and movements. And then he would like translate that into little dragon shapes. And then like here's additional ways of artists trying to understand nature. So back when Leonardo was around, you could just go to a doctor and say, hey, can I come in and watch while you like perform a autopsy on this dead person? And then he would do sketches from these really beautiful sketches. And in doing these drawings, he drew the first accurate portrait of the human spine. He wrote the first description of cirrhosis of the liver. And he's the first to state, although other people probably figured this out, he's the first to state that the heart had 4 chambers. And then this, like, so prior to Leonardo da Vinci's time, like in the, when the, like after Muhammad, and then people were spreading the doctrine of like spreading Islam, or like across Europe and Northern Africa. With them came all this scientific knowledge. Like a lot of what the people in the West learned about science came from these Arab scholars and medical people and scientists. And so these are like some early, this is like the nervous system, and then this is like a woman's internal anatomy. And so this practice of drawing these anatomical illustrations came from like Arab countries, but it was also practiced and probably spread through the spread of Islam, like into the East and into Western Europe. Here's, I believe this is a 17th century artist that did these beautiful, I hope they don't upset you though, beautiful anatomical drawings. And they, again, they're also from deceased people. This woman died before she gave birth. So another thing that artists do is they draw to understand and record movement. Now, movement like someone running, but also like how cloth moves around our arm, and the wrinkles, how the wrinkles move around the arm, and how the cloth flows. So it's not moving, but it is moving. How do you like that distinction? Nice. So he like looked at horses moving, he looked at water flowing. This is an image of hurricanes. He looked at all of these, just like curious and trying to figure out the movement of these, but he also would include some of these images in some of his paintings. So now we're going to talk about the different kind of drawing mediums. I'm not going to go really deep into this because you can read this in the chapter, but I'm just going to highlight some things. So the first one I'm going to talk about is metal point. Now, metal point, there's a piece of metal in these styluses, and the metal could be gold, silver, bronze, or otherwise. And what the artist does is they take a piece of paper that's been prepared with a gesso or a ground, and earlier I mentioned that could be made out of limestones, grind limestones and water, or out of ground shells or something. And they put that, prepare the paper with it, let it dry, and then they draw over it with these metal styluses. Now, when they first draw on the paper, the marks don't show up very darkly. That sounds weird. They're not very dark. But over time, the metal oxidizes, and over time, the drawings, the lines become darker and darker. And there's still, this is like by Albert Dürer. This is done in the 1500s. But there are still artists that, not a lot of them, but there's still artists that use metal point. So the next is waxy crayon or chalk. And that's just really a fancy way of saying crayon. And I saw these drawings. These are by an artist named Makita Akua. And they're like about, I want to say like 6 feet tall. and they are so amazingly beautiful. Now, these kind of waxy crayons, you if you get your hair done and you just like want a little bit of it colored, sometimes a hairdresser will take a waxy crayon and put it on your hair, and it'll make your little streak of hair like red or blue or something. That's the same kind of crayons, that those waxy chalks, the same thing as that and as crayons. Then there's graphite, and everybody, you have a pencil, and like, people say the pencil lead. Well, it's actually graphite, and the reason why we still call it lead is that graphite was discovered in England, and when they first discovered it, they thought it was lead, and hence the term stuck. But it's a good thing that it's not lead, or we would all be in trouble. And then the next thing is, and I'm searching for, because I want to get this right, I'm searching for a piece of paper that stupidly I dropped on the floor, and now I'm having to flip through my notebook. Why did I drop this on the floor? Oh, here it is. Okay, so these are, you know what flash art is? So flash art, if you go to a tattoo shop, by the way, I've gone and I have a tattoo. How do you like that? You go to the tattoo shop, and on the walls and in books, there'll be examples of drawings that you could pick for a tattoo. And those drawings, it's called flash art. Now, these are some really spectacular examples of flash art by an artist who goes by the name of Hiroyoshi III. These are done with brush and ink. So, and this is typically how they're done. So there's a palette, and this is a stick of India ink. It's been compressed, and they'll put a little water in this palette, and then they'll take that stick of India ink and kind of grind it, like grind it around in there so some of the ink comes off. And then they use these bamboo brushes, they're bamboo handle brushes, and to create these beautiful drawings. Now, this Hiroyoshi III, he does these full body tattoos. The method that he uses is called irizumi. And so instead of using that tattoo needle, the electric one, he does it by hand with bamboo or a metal pen. And like traditionally, these full body tattoos were done by the gangsters, the Yakuza, but he is trying to push that you don't have to be a gangster to get these. And I think on one of our tests, maybe for the drawing this week, I use a couple of examples of Hiroyoshi III's full body tattoos. They're amazing. So then the next thing we're going to talk about is charcoal. Now, charcoal is burnt wood or vine. And, like charcoal briquettes, think of it that way. So there's vine charcoal, which is a burnt vine, and it's softer and it's more gray. It would be like this. And then there's compressed charcoal. So then you're thinking like a piece of wood, and it's harder and darker and more black. So artists will use these in combination. So this is a preparatory sketch for the Detroit Industry mural. Like, it's just one of many images in the mural done by Diego Rivera for the Detroit Institute of Arts. Also, I want to mention, like, this is charcoal, but there's also some Conte and pastel in here, these different, like these skin tones. So when Diego Rivera did this mural, and you should look it up, it was just during the Depression, and there's this big giant mural that shows different Detroit industries, including the pharmaceutical industry. And when he was brought in to do the mural by Edsel Ford. People flipped out before. It's again another instance where people are flipping out before they even see something. So people were upset because they brought in a foreigner to do this. Diego Rivera was a communist. They saw this drawing, the sketch for this part of the mural has to do with vaccinations, and it looks like Mary and baby Jesus and Joseph in the manger because he has these animals. And then people are like, it's sacrilegious and it's anti-American. And Rivera started getting threats, and there had to be police guards, and like the church wanted, members of the church wanted it to be erased. But it got so much publicity that the first day of the unveiling, 10,000 people came, and people just kept coming and coming and coming. And so they kept it. Here's some more charcoal drawings. This is Charles White. This is Katie Kollwitz. This is Vincent Valdez. This is Georgia O'Keeffe. So you get this, like this Katie Kollwitz one, they're not using the point. She's not using the point for most of this. She's using the side of it. That's where you get these kind of marks where you're using the side instead of the point. Charles White's using compressed and that vine charcoal. Like Vincent Valdez, I'm guessing, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing he's using mostly compressed, maybe some vine. And then here's this beautiful flower by Georgia O'Keeffe that I am assuming is using mostly vine charcoal. So the next thing we're going to talk about is chalk. And chalk, you know what chalk is, like when you went to school back when we actually went into classrooms and teachers used chalk on the chalkboard. Well, that's chalk. And chalk's made out of natural materials such as soapstone, black, carbonicus shell. So when you're looking at this Robert Pruitt, the chalk part of this is the background of this piece. Now these other ones, these reds and yellows, those aren't natural colors. So those are most likely pastel, or maybe they might even be waxy crayon. This piece by Botero, the browns are chalk, the blue is not chalk, the red's not chalk, because those are not natural colors. Those are, again, probably pastels. So pastels are mineral or plant-based, and they're powdered, and then they mix them with gum arabic, and they come in like the whole range of colors, all sorts of colors. Only they're softer than that compressed charcoal. And so like with pastels, the way the terminology works is if you do a pastel and a lot of the paper still shows, that's called a pastel drawing. This is by Marie Cassatt. But if you do a pastel and you cover up the entire surface of the drawing, like this Vincent Valdez piece, then that's when they call it a pastel painting. I don't know why they do that, but just remember the pastel drawing, there's a lot of paper still showing. Pastel painting, there's no paper showing, and it's all covered in pastels. The next is Conte. It's really hard. It's made from clay and gum arabic, and it comes in earth colors. It's harder than chalk and pastels. Like in the Seurat here, a lot of times when you use Conte, it doesn't blend very well. So you have to do marks and dots and cross hatching in these because it's really hard to blend it. I mean, it does come in hards and softs. Soft's a little easier to blend, and it's really hard to erase as well. And then Matisse, toward the end of his life, he did these paper cutout drawings. He was in a wheelchair. He had a lot of health issues. And so he worked with an assistant, and he would cut out paper, and then he would have the assistant pin them on the wall or pin them on another piece of paper. And these are, we now term these as cutout drawings because he's drawing with paper. I can't make a distinction of why they call them drawings for you. But let's just trust me and we'll call them cutout drawings. I'm sorry I can't explain any further. Finally, we're going to talk about a couple of artists, one more in particular. This is Whitfield Lovell, Lovell, I'm sorry. And he actually had a show in Houston at Project Row Houses years ago, where I don't know if any of you have ever been there. You should go there. It's a group of row houses that were built by people after they'd been emancipated from slavery. And 7 of those houses are used for artist installations. And the first house in the row next to the office is the one that's the most, that hasn't been fully restored and is the most like it would be when a person lived in the house, and it has unpainted walls. And he did drawings on the wood on those walls. Beautiful, beautiful drawings. So this piece, A Tour du Monde, around the world, it depicts African American soldiers, and he's using all these globes, and he's drawing on the wood, a lot of times ink, charcoal, and these are African American soldiers from World War I. And this installation has a lot of layered meanings to it. In part, it relates to his grandfather, and his grandfather tried to enlist in the army in World War I, and they told him he was too short. And then the next black man that came after him, they told him he was too tall to enlist, but really it was because they were most likely being racist. Those African American men that were allowed to enlist, and then they went overseas, and they went over to France, and in France they were treated as equals. They went across the globe and were treated as they should have been treated in their own country. So this also relates to how when they came home, they were back being treated horribly and unjustly. He also, in addition to doing drawings on wood, sometimes or on paper or on fabric, sometimes he'll do the drawing, but then he attaches pieces to it. This first one's cut, and you could come up with all sorts of meanings what this axe and hatchet, like what they mean in relationship to this woman. This is called Kin 12, Dance or Die. This is a white couple that's been attached. He's going wedding cakes. This is a black couple on the right. And you could look at this, and I'm sure you could come up with a variety of what this means in this context. And then this one is Woman 2. And it's a lithographic print on paper. These other ones are done with Conte. And then finally, this is William Kentridge, and I believe this week I put one of his animated films in the folder. He's from South Africa. his family is, I believe, Lithuanian Jewish, and they left Lithuania during the pogroms when there was persecution of the Jews. And then his family moved to South Africa, but then as a child, he started witnessing and actually paying attention to all the horrible injustices of apartheid. So a lot of times his work reflects that really heavy duty part of South Africa's history, which even though they've abolished apartheid, there's still horrible discrimination. And with that, I believe that's the end of the chapter. All righty, I'll see you tomorrow when we talk about painting.